Steve Jobs is our finest example from Silicon Valley in what it truly means to be a visionary entrepreneur who successfully set out to change the world for the better. Or, as he put it, to put a dent in the universe. And with his products, from the original Macintosh to the classic iPod to the revolutionary iPhone, he has left us with a masterclass in how to design incredible user interfaces that allow people to use technology to better their lives and express their own creativity. The approach Steve Jobs took to design, from minimalist aesthetics to sleek interfaces, is much different than how companies today design digital experiences, which often feature overly crowded menus and half-baked features. In this video, we will analyze the design principles we can infer from Steve Jobs' portfolio of work and discuss how we can apply these design principles to our own work as web designers in order to wow our clients and impress visitors. What's up, everybody? How's it going? Welcome back to the YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Bailey Canning. I'm an independent marketing strategist based in Denver, Colorado, primarily working with my clients on branding, web design and development, and ongoing marketing retainer projects. This is a video idea I have had for a very long time here, and I wanted to make sure I put in the due diligence necessary to properly honor the work of Steve Jobs. On a personal note, no other entrepreneur has been more influential in my young career to date than Mr. Jobs. I remember very vividly my freshman year of college, I began reading the famous Walter Isaacson biography on him. This was literally as I was moving into the dorms. And that book really distilled in me the importance of, instead of trying to climb the corporate ladder, to instead build your own ladder and do things the way you want to do them and to not care about anyone else's opinions. Based on that biography, there are 9 design principles I have pulled that I believe are extremely applicable even today in our work as web designers. Without further ado, let's get into the design principles we can infer from Steve Jobs' portfolio of design work. The most important foundational design principle from Steve Jobs' work is the concept of minimalism. Without understanding minimalism and the way Steve Jobs applied it to his entire design philosophy, there is no way you can properly understand his visionary design instincts. Before we get into discussing Steve Jobs' love of minimalism and how he applied it to his own design work with Apple, first, let's take the time to define minimalism so that we have a clear, shared understanding of what minimalism actually means when it comes to design. So excuse me as I read off from my laptop here, but minimalism in design is a philosophy and aesthetic that emphasizes simplicity, functionality, and the reduction of elements to their essential form. It prioritizes clean lines, open space, and a restrained color palette to create a sense of calm, clarity, and focus. Now, you'll know from reading the Walter Isaacson biography on Steve Jobs that he was profoundly influenced and first introduced to Zen Buddhism after he famously dropped out of college to go backpack around India and essentially meditate, drop acid, and meet with many of these monks and others in these Zen Buddhist temples. And this is where he really gained an appreciation for this minimalism, for the clean aesthetics that would inspire this clarity and focus he was after. And it seems that trip was really the catalyst that ultimately informed his love of design and his love of minimalist design in particular. We can also see his love of minimalism not just from the products, both physical and digital, that he designed, but also in his choice of cars, his choice of furniture, his famous, very simple outfit, and even in the very modest home he lived in, considering how wealthy he was. Personally, I'm a very big fan of minimalism myself, and I was even employing that as I designed my apartment. But then I will tell you, after having a few different ladies come over, they were not too big on the minimalist design aesthetic, or certainly not in the way I was. So over time, I've become to embrace a more mid-century modern approach. While there is a risk to being too minimalist and too bare bones, many web designers could in fact benefit from not trying to overly design elements, but rather to embrace minimalism and to embrace a less is more approach. There's that famous quote about design that says, "A designer has achieved perfection not when there is nothing left to add, but rather when there is nothing left to take away." That quote is really at the heart of Steve Jobs' love and appreciation of minimalism. If you're wondering what minimalism actually looks like in the context of web design, one of my favorite examples is a website I designed for my client 1070 Architecture. They are a modern and minimalist architecture studio based in San Diego, California. And when we were first getting started on the project, the client really wanted to ensure that modern and minimalist design in his own work was going to be represented digitally on the website. And so this website in my portfolio was profoundly influenced by Steve Jobs' minimalism. I remember at the time I was reviewing Apple's website a lot. I was looking at all their digital experiences. I was looking at even their own product design, and I was trying to find inspiration that we could use on the website to create that sleek, minimalist, high-end look. One of the benefits of minimalism, whether we're talking about digital design like websites or physical design like interior design, is that minimalist interiors and minimalist interfaces automatically communicate a sleeker or high-end design aesthetic. Especially when we think about interior design, when you see these very Pinterest-like photos, many times an easy way to achieve this in your own home would be to simply remove a lot of clutter in order to have a more streamlined space, which is automatically going to look a lot more high-end. This is especially true not just in modern and mid-century modern design, but also when we look at Japanese-inspired interiors, there's often very little unnecessary ornament. Here are some pro tips you can use in your next web design to successfully integrate a minimalist aesthetic. Remove everything that isn't necessary, because when it comes to minimalism, every element should serve a purpose and not merely be just for aesthetics. Embrace white space as an element and allow your designs to breathe. Have a very limited intentional color palette of no more than 2 to 3 colors. Have one primary CT action per page. And don't over-explain with copy, but rather just give people enough information to skim and get the main point. Minimalism is very evident in all of Apple's design. This has been true since its inception from the 80s to today. Our second design principle we can infer from Steve Jobs' work is going to be a focus on functionality. As Jobs famously said, design is not just what it looks like or feels like, design is how it works. This is a very important concept because in my view, when we over design elements, when we have too much going on, when things are overly crowded, it makes it very confusing for people to navigate throughout the website. It makes it confusing for people to actually digest the content on the website. And ultimately, this makes it harder for us to communicate our clients' marketing and message to their clients and customers. So it's very important to understand that design serves the user's goals and not just aesthetics. This is very important because as designers, we put so much time and attention into creating great, visually interesting layouts that are going to be very memorable for our clients. But ultimately, we need to ensure that the website's functionality comes first, because I'm sure there is nothing more frustrating you've ever experienced than when you're trying to use a website to do some certain task, maybe fill out a form, maybe make a purchase online, and you keep running into technical errors that are no fault of your own, and ultimately you're not able to do the thing you're trying to do, which is going to waste your time, make you frustrated, put you in a bad mood. You get the idea. That is why it is very important that we must focus on functionality first. Some applications here include a clear hierarchy of information, so it's very easy for people to digest the content on the website. Intuitive user flows where they don't need instructions on how to navigate the website. Forms should be simple and frictionless. All core functionality of the website must work flawlessly before you focus any additional attention in terms of adding animations or other interesting effects to the website. And finally, the design and functionality of the website should work flawlessly no matter what device it's viewed on. Number 3 would be navigation. Apple is no stranger to completely reimagining the way we interface and operate with technology. Famously, the original Macintosh was the first computer to ever have a graphical user interface, or a GUI. It was the first computer where instead of having a Microsoft DOS-like system, which I'm too young to have ever actually experienced, it's like in old movies where it's a very beige-looking computer and it's got those green lines of code. The original Macintosh was the first computer where people actually had like a desktop, and then there were icons that you could click on to open a text editing app, for example. And that's why originally the Macintosh was marketed more towards the main mainstream consumer, although you did have to be pretty wealthy to own one. But that's what really brought computers into the mainstream, because now it was a much lower barrier to entry to begin using them. Apple famously essentially also invented the mouse, or at least they're the company that made the mouse go mainstream. I believe how the story goes is that Bell Labs, which is one of the subsidiaries spun up by Thomas Edison, was doing a bunch of R&D type work. One of the ideas they came out with was a mouse, but no one at IBM or Microsoft thought it was going to be useful at all until Steve Jobs found out about this, and then along with the graphical user interface, saw how both combined could completely revolutionize the way people use computers. Jobs did this time and time again with his work, completely reimagining the way we use digital products. Famously, he did this with the iPod in the early 2000s with its click wheel, and famously, he did this once again with the iPhone, which used a fully touchscreen interface at a time when BlackBerries were the most popular phone with its QWERTY physical keyboard. When it comes to navigation on a website, users should, 1, never feel lost. 2, you want to have a clear, consistent menu structure, as well as an obvious visual hierarchy. I strongly urge you to limit the menu items no more than 5 or 7. There's been several UX studies that suggest that once a menu has over 7 items, it becomes very difficult for people to make a decision. We want to have clear visual feedback on where people are on the website. So on the menu, the page they are on should have a different color link than the rest of the menu items. And then finally, my big tip here is that if you're going to have a very large website, I highly recommend you employ mega menus, especially if you can integrate visual elements. This is something I've been helping a lot of my clients out recently because they're so easy and intuitive to design in Webflow. And going back to the minimalist example we talked about earlier, consider a hamburger menu, because that is going to allow you to have a very simple, sleek navigation where you just have 2 or 3 lines at the top, and then when someone clicks on the hamburger icon, you can then have a very cool looking full screen menu. All right, real quick, if you are enjoying this video and you have an upcoming website build that you want designed in a minimalist Steve Jobs-esque style, then definitely feel free to shoot me an email. My email is going to be linked in the description of this video, and give me a couple details about your project, what you're envisioning in terms of scope of work, timeline, budget, all those key considerations. If, based on everything you tell me, I think you're a good fit, I will email you back with a link to book time directly on my calendar to schedule a one-to-one design consultation with me. This no obligation consultation is very casual, very chill, and I will take the first half of the meeting to learn more about your company, its marketing and sales goals, and anything else that is pertinent to the website project you are considering. And then, based on everything I learn, I will outline a web design and digital marketing game plan so you can achieve your company's marketing and sales goals. My email is in the description of this video, and without further ado, let's get back into it. Number 4 here on the list is going to be typography. Unlike IBM or Microsoft at the time, Jobs took a profound interest in typography, and specifically, he wanted the original Macintosh to have a font library where people could have custom fonts, and really did also pay a lot of attention to the stock fonts that were shipped with the original Macintosh. This comes from Jobs' time auditing classes in college when he was technically a dropout, but also not really. It was a bit of a confusing situation. But one of the classes he audited was a typography class, and this is what gave him an appreciation of the importance of typography, and ultimately this is what inspired him and what drove him to ensure that the original Macintosh, as well as every other Apple product from there on out, was going to have unique, custom, well-designed fonts that were going to add an elegant touch to the user's digital experience. How I advise you to integrate this into your own work is to always use a custom Adobe font over a standard generic Google font that's going to be found on many other websites. Second, you want to establish clear hierarchy in the form of sizes and font weights. I recommend keeping the fonts you use to 2 to 3 at max. Generally, 1 heading font and 1 body font, along with different weights used throughout the design, is going to be plenty. You also want to ensure that the font sizes will scale well across the design. This is why I recommend always using rem or em instead of pixels. Finally, you must prioritize readability over aesthetics when it comes to typography. This goes right in line with the minimalism design aesthetics, especially one of its key tenets, which is that form follows function. Now, let's move on to animations and interactions. In line with the concept of minimalism that we discussed, when it comes to animations and interactions on the website, it is important to keep it tasteful and do not overdo it. This is certainly an area where less is more. After all, we certainly don't want to be triggering any sort of epileptic seizures as people visit our clients' websites. Now, use any Apple product today, and there's going to be animations and interactions subtly placed throughout the user interface. One of the best examples I can think of is the slide to unlock gesture, which if you have the sound on your phone will have a nice unlocking sound. There's also that bounce effect that you'll see as you end up scrolling through a list on your iPhone. And then on the Mac, when you place something in the trash, there's that little whoosh sound that really just makes it very satisfying to be cleaning up your computer. Even the glass staircases at many of these Apple stores are designed to ensure that as you walk through it, everything seems very intentional and very elegant. In our own work as web designers, here are some pro tips we can use when it comes to animations and interactions based on Apple's design philosophy. Number one is that animations should guide users, not overwhelm or distract. Deploy subtle hover effects that provide feedback as people browse the website. For example, when someone hovers over a button, it should either change color or have some other unique interactive effect that communicates to people that if they click on that, they will navigate to a different part of the website. Scroll triggered animations work very well here as well because they allow you to tell a story with the design. This is why I'm a big fan of horizontal scrolling, because in my view, it really just breaks people out of the vertical scrolling rhythm they're in and really forces them to pay attention to the design as well as the message you're trying to communicate. So you can use loaders here as well as page transitions to provide a very memorable browsing experience. Number 6 here is going to be accessibility. Steve Jobs profoundly believed that technology was for everyone, whether you are a student or you are a grandma. And he believed that everyone should be able to use technology to express their creativity. This is why many times the people who use Apple products, especially desktops, are in professions where creativity is highly prized. For example, advertising, where people who use Microsoft products, generally speaking, are in much more corporate professions, finance, for example. Because of this, Apple has been a long supporter of accessibility and has always been early to add additional accessibility features so everyone can use its devices to their full extent. Accessibility is something that's become increasingly important in the world of web design. Here are some basic elements you can begin to implement to ensure that the website is accessible and able to be browsed by everyone, no matter if they have a disability or not. Number one is going to be high contrast for readability. This is something you can now see directly in the Webflow Designer, so it's very easy to check this right away. Number two is going to be proper heading structure, so it's very easy to read the content on the website. You need to have alt text for all images on the website so that people who are viewing the device on a screen reader, because they're visually impaired, can see what the image is supposed to represent. The website should have keyboard navigation support, so people can browse just using their keyboard and not their mouse. It should be compatible with screen readers. And then finally, there should be clear focus states so people can get visual feedback as they browse the website. This is another thing that is now easily accessible in the Webflow Designer. Number 7 is going to be technical excellence. There's a famous story in the Isaacson biography where Jobs was working with his father. I believe they were building some sort of dresser or a fence or something like that. It's not really important. The important takeaway from the story is that Jobs' father drilled into him the importance of making sure everything looked great. For example, in the fence, I believe it was, there was one area where they didn't need to worry about the design in the back because nothing was ever going to be seen there. But Jobs' father instilled to him the importance of, even if it's never going to be seen by people or seen by very few, it's still very important that it looks beautiful. The application here to our own work as designers is to ensure that the website features clean code even if no one's ever going to see it, because clean code is going to result in a fast loading website that's going to have high performance for its visitors. You're also going to want to make sure that as you code the website, whether you're using a page builder or you're hand coding it, you're using some sort of framework so that it's very easy for other people to review the website and jump in if you were ever to hire another developer or a new developer were to take on the project. Of course, you're going to want to ensure that the website loads very fast and that it does not have any bloated code. On top of this, you're also going to want to make images are well optimized so that they do not unnecessarily slow down the website. Number 8 is going to be emotional storytelling. Famously, people said about Steve Jobs that he had a reality distortion field where he was able to convince people of certain things or even convince people in themselves to do things that they at the time thought were going to be completely impossible. He was also a master at crafting emotional hooks to clearly communicate the value proposition of his products. Think about the way he unveiled the original MacBook Air. Instead of telling people how thin it actually was in terms of millimeters, he simply took it out of a simple office envelope to communicate visually how thin and how light this product was. And famously, when he first introduced the iPod, instead of saying it has 5 gigabytes of storage, he said it has 1,000 songs in your pocket. Then of course, think about that famous Super Bowl ad that launched right before the Macintosh went live. In the commercial, they're not even featuring a product. So instead of selling a product, they're selling a vision. They're selling a way of life. That is why so many Apple products, whether we're talking about the iPhones or the MacBooks, have become status symbols more than just technological products. And that is why many competitors such as Android struggle to compete with Apple, at least here in America, because at the end of the day, due to Apple's marketing, they have people so emotionally connected to their products that when people need a new iPhone or a new Mac, they don't even consider other options. They just go out and get the latest Apple product in that category. Some ways you can integrate this design storytelling in your work is to have a clear brand story developed, have well-developed customer or client avatars so you actually know who you are communicating with, lead with the why before the what, use visuals that showcase emotion rather than features, write headlines that speak to aspirations, not specifications, and structure pages in the form of problem, solution, transformation. Include customer testimonials or coach your customers on writing up testimonials for you that focus on the feeling they felt when working with you. Create clear before and after narratives, and use video content just like this to create a deeper emotional connection. Last, but certainly not least here, let's talk about thinking different. This is famously the slogan Apple has used for decades now, and it was the focus of a major ad campaign back in the day, honoring some of history's most visionary thinkers, philosophers, and designers. Now, while we have talked about many design principles here, it is important to understand that while good websites follow convention, great websites break convention. This is ultimately what's going to allow you to deliver a truly memorable experience to your visitors. To do this, I encourage you to question established patterns and think to yourself, is this really going to be serving the visitor of the website? Create memorable entry animations that really set the tone for the digital experience people are about to have. Feel free to experiment with unconventional navigations like mega menus or hamburger menus to better serve your visitors. You could even try unexpected clashing color schemes as long as they still are accessible. You could use creative cursor animations, but finally, I think the most applicable thing here is to break the standard web design grid so you can have layouts that are not automatically symmetrical with each other. But finally, you must remember here to remember the Steve Jobs rule that you only break convention when you can do it better. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so that is the video for today. I hope you got a lot out of it, whether that be entertainment or simply the educational aspects we touched on in regards to Steve Jobs' design philosophy and how you can integrate his design philosophy next time you're building out a new website for a client. I'd love to hear from you in the comments, so if there's anything you want to say, whether you agree with the video, disagreed, or maybe you have something else to add, feel free to drop a comment and I will do my best to get back to any well-intentioned comments. Otherwise, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any of the other branding or web design content I'm going to be coming out with. And until further ado, I will see you in the next one. Take it easy. Bye.